I grew up in Massachusetts, where people often told scary ghost stories. Though I had heard them before, I had only had one strange experience. But what happened next made me never want to go back to that place again. When I graduated from high school, I chose to have fun before going to college in the fall. But I had no idea that summer would be one I would never forget. As a way to keep myself busy and learn new things, I chose to join Job Corps. One was in Grafton, Massachusetts, and the other was in Exeter. The Grafton campus was the one I chose at random. After only 2 days, they called me back and told me I could become a domestic student. They put you in a trade school if you don't know how technical colleges work. If you're a residential student, you live on campus. If you're a non-resident student, you go home after class. Because I lived on campus, I shared a room with 3 other students. We became great friends. I quickly learned how to cook, which was my chosen job after starting trade school. The cook told us an interesting story. The campus used to be a mental hospital. He said that everything was linked by tubes under the houses, so they could move people around without having to worry about them getting lost in the woods. But until he showed us a secret floor hidden in a far part of the building, most of the students thought it was all made up. A broken lift and a flight of stairs, he said. The patients were moved around with those steps and the broken lift. My friends and I agreed that we should see it as soon as we could. We were very interested. There was a chance that the cook would see us, so we waited for it. Finally, after 2 weeks, my friend Sam and 2 other people quietly followed me into the back room. We sneaked down the halls until we got to the locked door. We all ran into the dark hallway after Sam broke the locks. As we went down that dark hallway, it was both exciting and a little scary. We took out our cell phones and turned on the flashlights when we got to the end of the dark tunnel. This helped us see better. We began to look for the steps and elevator that were supposed to take us to the lower floors. The steps were found, and there was another door at the bottom. This made us very happy. When we pushed it open, we saw a long hallway with about 20 doors on each side. There were more doors on each of the hallway's 2 paths. We carefully walked inside and peered into the leftmost room. It looked like a scene from a scary movie. A chair with metal straps for arms and legs was bolted to the floor. We stopped for a moment to calm down before going down the hall. There was something in every room. It didn't just look old and empty. It looked like everyone left all of a sudden. There were some scalpels on a table that we saw. Most of the rooms had stretcher beds, but some had dirty brown blankets all over the place. As we got closer to the crossing, Sam stopped us all of a sudden and waved for quiet. And we did what he said. We listened carefully. In the dark, we had to strain to hear anything other than our own breaths. There was nothing at first. Then, as we let out a breath, we heard what sounded like something hitting the floor. It wasn't loud or heavy, not as loud as a coin dropping. We took a moment to look at each other and then listened again. This time, the sound seemed much closer. As soon as we were done, we ran out of there and back up the stairs. We saw the light from outside when we got to the bottom. We all gathered there and laughed uncomfortably at how scared we were. One of our friends then stood up straight all of a sudden. His face turned red right away, and we could see goosebumps appearing on his arms as we let go of him and turned toward the long hallway ahead. We all looked at the spot where he was looking, and what we saw scared us. There was someone else in the building with us. There was something waiting at the end of the hallway. It wasn't in the middle, but to the side, as if it wanted to hide. We didn't move. All of us tried to tell ourselves that we were crazy or just imagining things, but our hopes were dashed when the figure vanished behind the wall. At first, we didn't even know we had been standing there for 15 minutes until something moved. We ran as fast as we could up the stairs and back to the classroom. As soon as we got out, Sam and the friend with goosebumps threw up from being so scared. We never went back down there after that. We never went back to those halls. We still talk about it and share stories from other students, but I know for sure that I will never go back. I'm going to talk about the scariest thing that took place to me in college. It was in the fall of my rookie year, 20 years ago. The time was late at night, around 9 p.m. I was in my dorm, which had rooms on 6 floors and a few common areas. The person I live with on the first floor is really nice. I had to print out some homework that night, but the only printers were in the lounge downstairs. That's why I went downstairs. I saw a man standing outside the door when I got there. He looked a lot older than most of the college students I see. Then I saw that he had a pizza in his hand. It dawned on me that he delivered pizza. Pizza delivery to dorms was common practice for college students. I waved back and told him I didn't order any by shaking my head. He then knocked on the door and waved for me to come in. I opened the door when I got there. He asked me if I ordered pizza. He said it was fine, but someone else had already paid for it and wanted it brought to their room, so he had to go inside. Now that I think about it, that sounded really strange. I went back to my room when I was done. My friend and I played video games until we got tired around 11 o'clock. We went to sleep by turning off the lights. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of our lock being turned. It made me feel bad, so I checked my roommate's bed to make sure it was him. My friend in the room was still asleep. Going back to sleep was hard because the sound wouldn't go away. I began to worry after a short time. I got out of bed to find out who it was. It was the pizza delivery guy I had helped get into the building earlier. It was weird for him to try to get into my room. I went to his room to wake him up. He was really mad when I shook him at first. Our door opened right then. The man started to come in, but he was shocked to see that both of us were awake. Someone yelled at him to leave my room. He told us we had to believe him when he said he wasn't going to. After that, he carried a bag and told us not to look inside. It made me think of a threat. Then my friend went to our window, which was left open a bit because it was hot outside. He opened it up more and jumped out. After seeing the man's face, I followed my friend out the window without giving it a second thought. The man chased us around campus. We ran as fast as we could until we came across a street with good lighting and saw a campus police car. They saw how scared we looked and stopped. We were no longer being chased by the man. The police came to search the dorm building after we told them what happened. They looked everywhere but couldn't find the man, so he got away. I'm sorry I let him in, but I'm glad no one got hurt. My best male friend and I liked to drive around at night on empty roads when we were teenagers, in 2001. We'd talk and look for cool things like animals. We lived in the country, so this was our main way to have fun since we didn't like going to parties or other events. So the night started out like any other. He picked me up in his car and took me to some quiet roads. I agreed to see this house that he thought was great, so we drove for 25 minutes to get there. It was dark, so it was hard to see much, but the house looked pretty cool. We parked the car further down the road so that we wouldn't wake up the people who were looking out their windows. As we sat there and talked and looked at the house, we saw two bright lights moving up the wall. He turned off his headlights because he didn't want to bother them. The lights showed up over and over. Going up and down the house wall was easy for them. We turned around and checked behind the car, but there were no other cars there. Besides that, there were no other houses close. We both began to feel nervous at that moment, like something strange was going on. After giving each other a quick look, we both agreed that it was time to go. As he pulled onto the road, he laughed uncomfortably and we drove off. We didn't talk much because we were both scared. When we got to the end of the road with a stop sign, my friend slowed down. This ball of light shot straight out of the sky, hit the front of our car, and then shot back up into the sky really quickly. There was a big flash and a loud thud. The light wasn't there when we both leaned forward and looked up through the window. We were both very scared at that point. We all decided that it would be best to go home and sleep. We went back to the main road. My friend decided to stay on the same back road instead of going back the way we came. It went up and over a mountain and then came out near where we live on the other side. We were both afraid to say how scared we were at this point, so we didn't talk. There was something I thought was in the back seat of our car, but I didn't know how to tell him without coming off as scared. I finally couldn't keep it to myself any longer, so I told him the truth. He laughed uncomfortably at first, then got serious and told me he agreed. I turned the whole car around to check the back seat, but it was always empty. I guess that's good news for us. When we got to the other side of the mountain, we took it easy for a while. We were laughing at the situation while also trying to figure it out at the same time. We both agreed to follow through with our plan to end the night. We left the road and went back to the main road. An orange flash of light caught our eyes before we even reached the main road. The trees behind us and the whole mountain peak were lit up. We both looked at each other and asked, "What the heck?" "Where are you going?" asked a deep, scary voice, but we didn't answer it or him. Instead, we drove away, shaking and trying to figure out what had just talked to us. He drove home after dropping me off at my house. I was too scared to go to my room or even close my eyes to sleep, so I sat on the couch in the living room. In its place, I sat quietly by the window and looked up at the sky full of stars for a while. But then I saw that one by one, the stars were going away, turning the sky dark. I blinked and looked again because I didn't understand what was going on. I couldn't see the stars through the big dark shade outside. The phone rang all of a sudden. My friend called from a phone booth in town. He said he knew someone or something was following him while he was going home. He was so scared that he drove right to town, where there were lights and people. Things settled down in the end, and I chose to try to sleep. That time my friend chose to go home, and I think he did so without any issues. I slept on the floor in my mom's room because I was still very scared. After what happened, I told him the next day. He tried to make it seem less scary, but I think he was trying to hide something from me. He then said we must have been hearing or seeing things that weren't there, but I know we weren't. I have to go by it sometimes because the center where I take my kids is close by. I get chills every time I see that road on our way to the ER. I don't think I'll ever drive down that road again, and I'll do everything I can to stay away from it. I stayed on campus during spring break when I was in my first year at a college in New England. One of my friends also stayed because his trip got pushed back. The time I had was spent by myself walking around and looking at the town. I looked into shops and bars as I walked down Main Street. Even though it wasn't what I had planned, it was a nice break. I began by walking in the opposite way, in search of a trail that went through the woods. Other students had told me a lot of stories about this trail. They said it made them feel creeped out when they walked it. Still, I chose to ignore their advice and give it a try anyway. I began to feel uncomfortable about halfway through the woods on the trail. It was even worse than I thought. At some point, I asked myself if I was going to give up and go back. Even though it felt weird, I kept walking because it was just trees, and I'd been through woods many times before. At the start of the trail, there was a green car with a person sitting in the driver's seat. He looked like a man in his 40s or 50s. We looked at each other for a moment, and then I looked away in a weird way. I began to wonder why someone would park their car there by the trail because it felt strange. I kept walking because it might not have been my business. That, and I thought they were far away. By the time I got to the end of the trail, they would have left or gone. I was wrong, though. When I got close to the exit, they got out of their car and began walking toward me. It got even worse how you felt. I decided to walk faster than the person who was coming up behind me. I had to leave the trail, though. I had to find a different way out, stay away from him. It might have seemed silly to turn off the trail just because I saw someone else, but I can't explain how scared I was inside. It was scary and felt wrong. I was lucky to find a road that wasn't used as much and split in two right away. I picked the one on the left. After going out of sight, I ran down the road and saw a field ahead. I ran to the other side where there were trees. After that, I hid behind the biggest one I could find. All of a sudden, I thought I was in a scary movie. I could hear the man. It was rough and deep. I tried not to scream and kept quiet. I was sure that my worst fears were coming true now. He really wanted me. It was more than just a bad feeling in the gut. I could hear someone coming up to my tree. It felt like hours that I was there. Next thing I knew, my friend, who was also staying on campus, called me on the phone. I picked up, but I couldn't talk. She was the first to speak. She asked me if everything was okay. She said she had been outside too and seen me on the trail. She was eager to meet me again. The strange man followed me after I got scared and ran off the trail. The guy got scared when he heard her footsteps and ran away. That day will always be in my mind. Also, I no longer go to that college. I'm still careful when I think about going for walks. Somehow I keep walking away from cars with people inside. It makes me think too much about what happened that day. I'm a woman from Romania who is 24 years old. I was about 22 years old and going to a big university in Western Romania to get my master's degree at the time. Class starts in the afternoon and goes until late at night because it's a master's program. The end of my class that day was at 9 p.m. on a cold January night. I stayed on campus, which was very close to the school. It was a 10-minute walk. My boyfriend also lived nearby. I said goodbye to my friends and left after class. I often take the same route home, but I picked a faster one. Between the main building of the university and a church, it went through a small park. I never walked alone through the park at night again after that day, though. The park has a main walk that goes straight to the main road. The trees have made it dark, and there are no lamps. The church close is the only source of light. I never thought I was in danger because a lot of students walk that way all day and night. Being alone in the dark made me very nervous because I get scared easily. After that, I saw him. He was behind a tree. Even though I was cold, my legs kept moving. He came out from behind the tree and stopped 3 feet away when we looked at each other. From what I remember, he didn't look scary at first. He was short, maybe in his 40s, and had his hands in his pockets. I wasn't scared right away, but it was definitely strange. He stood there until I walked by. He grabbed my arm out of the blue and turned me around to face him. I was scared and thought something terrible was going to happen. Afraid to fight back, I said, "Get away from me or I'll call the police." I had tears in my eyes. He smiled and said, "We both know you won't get that chance." Suddenly I heard steps coming from the main road. We both looked in the direction of the path that connects to the main route that leads out of the park. A couple walking our way with their hands together. He ran quickly into the dark area between the trees as soon as he saw them. It looked like the couple was worried when they saw the man run off. I didn't want to stay and tell them what happened, though. I sped out of the park. In tears, I called my boyfriend on the main path where there were more people and asked him to meet me there and walk me home. I thought about calling the police, but in the end I chose not to. I didn't think the police could or would do anything because the man was already gone. It's possible that I felt embarrassed or guilty. Once that day, if I had late classes, my boyfriend would wait for me outside the building and walk me home. Just in case, I also started bringing pepper spray around with me.